So, hi, it's Steve Hassan, and I'm honored to be with Dr. Warren Throckmorton. Thank you so much for taking some time to speak with me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Great. And you are a professor, and you teach psychology, and you're an evangelical, and
Right.
write a very interesting blog that I've been spending a lot of time reading.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I teach social psychology, and I use your material in my section on new religious movements. So I'm very glad for that.
Cool. Thank you for doing that. Of course, I'm a purist as an ex-Moonie who was around way before new religious movements got coined by
Right.
sociologists. It's now the politically correct term, but
Right.
I question about the use of it with some of the particular groups I deal with. But anyway, I particularly just wanted to have the opportunity to talk with you about all of the blogs you've done regarding issues like Dominionism,
Hmm.
New Apostolic Reformation,
Okay.
and Donald Trump, and the reports that 81% of white evangelicals voted for Donald Trump, and that people somehow, I read the book by Stephen Strang, God and Donald Trump, and people are seemingly convinced and having prophetic visions that God wants Donald Trump. I watched the Trump prophecy movie yesterday, and I was like, oh my goodness. But you're an expert in overlapping fields as well as a personal, theological and spiritual orientation. So please tell me what you think is most important about this subject, please.
Oh my, where to start?
Well, maybe define Dominionism and the New Apostolic Reformation, if you're comfortable
Okay.
saying that.
Okay. Dominionism is a branch of Christianity, conservative Christianity, that sees the role of the church as as a force for dominion in society. Is certainly a force for good. I mean, they believe that the church is to be a force for good in society. They don't believe that they're out for for control's sake. They want they believe to have a helpful role in society. They want the good things that they believe go along with Christianity to accrue to everybody, but they have a kind of top-down view of that. Whereas evangelicalism historically has been personal relationship, one-on-one conversion conversations. One Christian talks to another person to convert them to Christianity, and in a sense, not to necessarily bring them into a movement, although that does happen, but to have them enter into relationship with Jesus Christ. That's what evangelism is. The Dominionists believe and sort of minimize that, and believe that the top or the mountaintops or the upper echelons of society, right? There's 7 mountains of society need to be captured in a way, or at least there needs to be dominion in those areas by Christians. And if Christians have control, or if there are a lot of Christians in the upper parts, the controlling parts of society in those areas, then the effect of that will trickle down.
Right. Government, business, education, media and arts, family,
Church,
church, of course, religion.
Forget that.
Right. So it's what's known as post-millennialist. Am I remembering my terms properly? That we need dominion first, and then Jesus will return.
Jesus will return after, right, we get it ready. Although I think there's less I mean, that's certainly part of it, but the part that really gets everybody's attention is the part about government, education,
Right.
some of those areas that are supposed to be more neutral, that are guaranteed by the Constitution to be neutral,
Right.
such as religious tests for government service. Congress will make no law regarding religion, that sort of thing. That the Dominionists blur because they want to see Christians, specifically Christians, in those governmental roles. They'd be very happy if Christians were elected to all the offices. More happy about that than if a lot of people were converted at the lay level.
Right.
They feel like that it was been a mistake to focus on evangelism of the people rather than focus on the kings, so to speak, or the leaders, the rulers in a culture.
Right. Thank you for that. And then the new apostolic reformation, is that something you're comfortable commenting about?
Well, that's very amorphous. There's less. I mean, the Dominionism is somewhat hard to define because there's not an organized Dominionist association exactly, but there are a group of teachers who espouse the Seven Mountains teaching that I just talked about.
Right.
There has been a group of apostles that espouse the new apostolic reformation, and essentially this is the belief that a new reformation has come on the church. Peter Wagner, I believe, is associated with this idea that that reformation is that a new group of apostles has been appointed by God to lead this dominionist charge in the church. To, in a sense, again, if the other Reformation was personal and spiritual, this Reformation is corporate and dominionist.
Right.
And that's what these apostles are to do, are to be generals in a spiritual realm. And so they talk about the spiritual realm as their battles being fought in the spiritual realm, and some of them pray over Washington, D.C., because there are forces of good and evil that are fighting over D.C. for the
you wrote a blog about a bunch of them coming to the Trump Hotel to do exactly that, in fact.
Exactly. They're in there praying for the forces, against the forces of Satan, because, of course, anybody who opposes Trump is satanic and opposing God.
Right. So like regular destructive cults, this black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil. We're the anointed. We're doing God's will. If you raise a question or a different perspective, you're evil, and you need to be quieted. You need to be kicked out. You have to submit yourself, or else you're satanic or something. Am I off base?
No, you're not, and there are many, I think, things that are troubling about the whole thing, the whole movement, but that's one of the practically troubling things, is that you don't see a lot of willingness to compromise or work with the enemy. I mean, after all, if your political opponent is satanic, then why would you compromise with your political opponent? And in the old days, when Republicans and Democrats went at it and they had ideological differences or policy differences, well, at the end of the day, they just disagreed. But in this era, when the disagreement signifies good and evil, the battle of lightness and darkness, Satan and the angels of light, it takes on a whole cosmic significance that is bigger than politics. And so those dominionists, those individuals who believe that they're fighting, instead of just spiritual battles, they're fighting spiritual battles that have political significance,
Right.
They're fighting the forces of evil when they're fighting the Democrats, or when they're fighting the Never Trumpers, or the people that oppose their president.
Right. And I'm not a Christian myself. I'm Jewish, but I know a good deal about Christianity, and I have friends who are evangelical ministers, and they tell me that Jesus' teaching is like render unto Caesar what Caesar. My kingdom is not of this world. If someone, an eye for an eye is the old scripture. I say, turn the other cheek. If someone is totally opposite of Jesus's teachings. So in that sense, and some of them just say it's aberrant Christianity. It's not, mainstream Christianity at all. And some say it's heresy.
Well, that gets thrown around a lot, and I don't,
You don't want to go near there. I understand.
Especially but is it, Jesus, you're right. Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. And that teaching gets its followers very close to believing that the kingdom is of this world, and that what you do here is of such kingdom significance that you have to win.
You're talking about the Dominionists, that teaching.
Right. That's right.
It's now or never, and if we don't take control now, then evil's going to win.
Right.
So tell me about your thoughts as an expert in psychology and social psychology and evangelicalism about Trump, and what your take is on President Trump and just this huge 81% or whatever the number is, white evangelicals who voted for him and who believe that in this notion that God is summoned him as a King Cyrus figure or a King David figure, using him to advance the providence.
Well, there are those that believe that. I don't know what percentage of that group believes that. I don't think it's 81%.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a kind of coalition of Christians in that number. There are some who do believe that in the strangest way possible that he was called in as a kind of King Cyrus. There are the Dominionists who believe that he was summoned in that way, and there are those who believe that he isn't at all what he portrays himself to be. There, those who think that the news is fake and that the people are making things up about him. But then there are others who believe that the alternative was worse. They've convinced themselves that whatever Trump does, that Hillary would have been worse, and that abortion is so awful that even though she might not have had any real impact on how it's actually practiced, the policies that are actually in place, then nothing much would have changed, in other words.
Right.
Just the idea of electing someone who was pro-abortion was so awful to them that they could overlook everything else. It
could have been Fox News and a few other sites like Breitbart and the alt-right and Russia.
Well, and the Russians
talked about Russia and like what happened to the GOP traditional view of Russia, and how is it all of a sudden okay to?
I do think that the only way, and there have been a lot of people smarter than me trying to make sense of this, but the only way I've been able to make any sense of this is to look at what the supporters of Trump view as the alternative. Mm-hmm. I live in Western Pennsylvania. It's a pretty conservative area, and those that do support Trump around here don't do it gladly. They aren't happy about it, but they really believed the proposition that the alternative would have been worse. Mm-hmm. They felt that the the Supreme Court would have been gone for a generation, if not longer. They felt that the economy would have, been bad. They had convinced themselves that we were on the precipice.
Or they were convinced.
Right, and they had
leaders, they had prophets who were saying God wants you all to vote.
Well, what I'm getting at is that I think that to put together a coalition of that many people, you have you have many different paths to the outcome, the same outcome.
Yeah.
There were, clearly bots, Russian bots, and fake accounts that were pushing, false stories about the Democrats and about Clinton and various things that people believed because they came from sources they trusted. And you still have that misinformation out there. You have others who were more thoughtful and didn't believe that stuff, but they just simply couldn't bring themselves to vote for what in their minds was a liberal Democrat.
Right, but I mean, that's one thing with the voting, but since the voting, he's been in office, and still there's a large percentage of people who believe in the concepts like the deep state, or everything critical of Trump is fake news, and such. And that kind of mindset is what I'm fascinated by and appalled by, if I might say, that it mirrors my time in the Moonies or my work with Scientologists or any number of other cults, where whatever facts were presented, former leaders telling what was really going on with the top, it didn't matter, because we were trained in this black and white, all or nothing, believe you're with God, and if you don't, then Satan is going to take you over and you're going to lose your salvation mindset. And that's what I'm kind of really curious how many people actually believe that.
Yeah, and I don't know that the 81% is there. I don't know that all of those people,
I would hope not.
I don't know what number it would be, but the dynamic that you describe relating to cults, I think is similarly played out with supporters of Trump, because no, he's not being elected now. There's no election. He's already in power. But they still have to justify their choice. And what we know about cognitive dissonance, and, what we know about self-justification is that people look for reasons why they do what they do, and they look to justify those reasons.
Right.
And finding after the fact, post hoc reasoning is, well, I had a good reason for doing it, and I surely don't want to be told reasons why it might not have been a good reason.
Right, but what I say to all of the people that I'm asked to counsel or assist who are involved with destructive cults is, if you go back in time to before you were approached, and who you were and what your values were and what you trusted, who you trusted, your family, your friends, etc. You go back there and then slowly evaluate, how did you change your mind? How did you come to get converted? You realize there was a lot of deception. Like, nobody came up to me and said, we believe in a Korean Messiah. We're going to have you bow to the floor 3 times every Sunday morning. They'll do mass weddings. They'll be assigned to someone that you won't know, and they won't speak your language. And by the way, Korea is the chosen nation. America is satanic. I would have said, you're psychotic. Leave me alone. But anyway, the point is if you understand at the time you were doing the best decision you could with the information you had, but that information was basically lies, mistruths, leaving out critical information, distortion of information, you can get to a place of face saving, of going, look, I'm an intelligent person. I did what I thought was right at the time based on the information and my experiences, but now there's new information, and holy mackerel, if I could go back in time, I never would have done what I did. I can't, but I can certainly say it was a mistake, and Moon isn't the greatest man in human history, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So that's my appeal to folks who may be in that confirmation bias or in that cognitive dissonance state of, well, I've invested all this time, emotion, energy defending my choice. How can I get out of this other than keep on, repeating my choice was the right one? And I say, look, we're human. Nobody's perfect. People make, errors in judgment all the time, especially if they're deliberately lied to and manipulated.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the dilemma then for the evangelical person is, so where do we go from there? If we get, okay, I'm in that place and I acknowledge that. Now what? For many of them, acknowledging it might be in private something they could do, but then there's a next election coming, and there's another decision coming or another choice. So I think that many people feel stuck because they don't want to cross party, or they don't want to cross ideology. They feel like I think they feel like that many who present that choice to them, well, look, you've been lied to, and you need to acknowledge that. They feel like inherent within that acknowledgement is, well, then I have to go all the way to the other side. Now, I know that you don't. I know that that's not, implied in that. But many people do feel that. And so then they recoil from that and, retrench and move back to where they were.
Right. So again, because I've been doing my work for 40 years, I do believe in God, and I do believe God wants us to use our conscience and our integrity, and not just follow an ideology, or not just be part of a group, whether it's Republican or Democrat or Libertarian or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That we need to, look at ourselves in the mirror each day. We need to look at our children if we have kids. I do, and do what's profoundly the moral choice, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's at odds with other choices in the past, to try to not just go, well, there's this critical inertia that everybody's, running towards the cliff. I can't stop because I might get trampled from behind. So I'm going to jump off the cliff too. It's like, doesn't make sense to me. It makes more sense to think, how did I get myself into this thing? Who was I before? And what's such a tragedy, Warren, and I know you feel this too, or I suspect you feel this way too, is that in this country, people aren't talking to brothers or sisters or aunts or uncles or parents because of how polarizing this last election has been, where everybody's calling each other stupid or idiots, and one side thinks they're brainwashed by the globalists, and the other side think they're brainwashed by the Russians and Putin. Right. And it's like, let's get back to like humanity and civility and moral choice and things like human rights and the Constitution, and use them for guidance. But I'm an idealist, as you can probably hear.
Yeah, I certainly agree.
So not to put words in your mouth, I've spent this whole morning reading your blogs. Can you summarize some of your key themes that you so eloquently wrote? And I'll put a link to your blogs, of course, about Trump and about the people who are blindly supporting him in terms of it being like a cultish kind of thing.
Well, yeah, let me think here. Seems like we've certainly done some of that.
Yep.
I think that Trump appeals to the fears that many people have that they're losing control of their world and their choices. They're losing control of something about the country that they valued and that they like a lot. And so he plays on those fears. And when he's attacked, it feels like maybe that their values are being attacked too. I also think that some of what they react to is maybe an overreaction sometimes to not. I want to say this: the evangelicals that see some of what Trump is doing as being deceitful and wrong. They do have a worldview that's supernatural, that is believes in absolute truths, and is more conservative than the critics. Mm-hmm. And so I think they take that the critics of Trump as being a critic of their worldview, mm-hmm. and so it doesn't just hit the mark of Trump's deception or Trump's problems or Trump's faulty policies. They personalize it and they take it as a criticism of their ideology. Mm-hmm. And that's some of what you're getting in the defense of Trump, mm-hmm. in addition to what seems obvious, that they're political opportunists. Mm-hmm. But as far as they're sticking with him, I think that there's a group of people, maybe 30% or so, 35%, who may stay with him no matter what he does. I would like to believe that there is a kind of a middle ground where some will, if they see that he is not who he says he is, that there will be some movement. It seems like the polling is showing that some are moving away, particularly among the independents, that they're moving away from Trump politically. And I do think that in terms of the political process, a lot depends upon what happens with the Republican Party and who the Democrats put up in the next election. Now, this is not really a summary. I'm just kind of
that's fine.
Thinking about some of the things I've written about. But I guess as far as Trump as a cult, I don't know that, and I think, you've written a lot about this. When I teach about this in my classes, I teach about, of course, mind control. And you have the model, the BIT model. Yeah, which I think is really valuable because it focuses people on the consequences of being in such a group, mm-hmm. that the group controls the behavior, controls the emotions, controls the thoughts, and that's where people's lives are changed. Right. That's where their lives are influenced. And so to the degree that following Trump, that defending Trump, that rationalizing his lies, rationalizing his actions, causes an individual to lose their relationships, to isolate themselves, isolate their families, limit their opportunities, to truncate reality.
Right.
That's where it becomes significantly troubling and problematic for the individual. And as you know, as a mental health professional, we look at to determine what is a disabling condition. We look at impairment, And that's one of the key factors that we look at, is how impairing is a condition on a person's life.
Right.
And so I do think that there is a subgroup of people
Mm-hmm.
who have become so, they're so, it's so necessary for them. Their self picture right now is so tied up in Trump succeeding and being praised and sort of his narcissism that they're limiting themselves. They're influencing their relationships with family. And it's as if they were in a mind control group.
Yeah.
It's not organized like many of them are.
Right. No, this is in the digital age where we're plugged into our computers and our cell phones and our TV sets, and maybe going to churches where the minister is a prophet and he's, you know, praying about how God needs to open up our hearts and we need to commit more fully to his, you know, providence on earth. And I think you said it very spot on about fear. It's, for me, the universal mind control technique is what I call phobia indoctrination.
Mm-hmm.
And in reflecting over my point in the Moonies, where I turned off my critical thinking completely, was right after I was taken to see the Exorcist movie by Moon with a few hundred other Moonies. And then we went up to Tarrytown and he gave a lecture about how God made this movie. This movie was a prophecy of what would happen to people who left the Unification Church. And it scared the bejeebers out of me. And
Sure.
Prior to the group, I didn't believe in Satan, you know, but I was fully convinced that all these supernatural entities were trying to invade me all the time. And they came, and I knew about them because I had a doubt about Moon or a doubt about the divine principle. And I did thought stopping. And for me, you know, because you know, I prayed, I chanted, I sang songs to get rid of the doubts, and it became this mind control process to keep this new identity, the Steve Hassan, who was son of Sun Myung Moon and Hak Jahan, the true parents of the universe, versus the real Steve, son of Milton and Estelle Hassan of Flushing, Queens. It was that other identity that was in charge of my body and my time. I was also sleep deprived. A lot of Americans are sleep deprived. And I was isolated because I was encouraged to drop out of college, cut off from my family and friends or anyone that I couldn't recruit successfully in. Not unlike multi-level marketing groups that promise $1 million and you just have to believe 100%, pray, and work really hard and you'll make $1 million in your spare time. In the meantime, your family's going, "Hey, Steve, you know, you're losing money. Like, these products are overpriced. What are you doing?" And you cut off from them because they're dream stealers, right? So I see a lot of patterns that, you know, need to be named, whether or not people can relate to them personally or not in their own experience. But, you know, another thing that I say to my clients, hey, if it's legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny.
Right.
So why not, like, hear the critics out, hear the former members, and trust your own ability to discern. And instead of operating out of fear, if you really believe in God, trust that God's almighty. You know, just like, hey, God, you know who I am. Like, you know, stand by me while I'm doing this process, instead of this phobia of I can't think that thought that maybe Putin is controlling, you know, my presidential choice, or maybe, you know, he's a billionaire who never cared about the common working man or woman in the United States and has just put all these other billionaires into power to see how much they can, you know, amass in terms of money. and such. And I guess I really believe in freedom, freedom of mind and freedom of religion. That if it's really legitimate, there won't be deception. You'll know upfront who the people are, what they believe, and what's going to happen to you after you join. And once you join, you always have, I can always leave if it's not working for me, or if I discover something is different. It's not a commitment forever, even though they may make you sign documents that you're signing a billion-year contract, as they do with the Sea Org in Scientology. The bottom line is we're humans.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm talking too much. I meant to interview you, Warren.
You can't, you don't join the Trump following, but you do, when you do leave it, if you do hear about it from those who support him. They do get on they really do castigate those who once favored him and now don't.
Social ostracism or shunning.
And then I know you maybe implied it earlier, but with his fake news and don't listen to those the reporters and only listen to Fox News. This is akin, of course, to creating your own social reality that cults do, and he is doing his best to make his own social reality. So there are many parallels in real time as we're watching it. And then to the degree, as you said earlier on, to the degree you link it with God, that God raised him up, or we're praying, against the demonic forces against him. I mean, to the degree that Trump is linked with God, then you have the, hero worship and the type of mythology that is created around the founder, like I know was true of Moon.
Right.
So you do have quite a few parallels, and I suspect that's what your book will.
Yeah, and just to comment on another parallel, I was in the group in 1974. I had voted for McGovern, a Democrat, in my first election. My father voted for Nixon. I get into the group, and Moon says God wants Nixon to be president despite Watergate. We should forgive, love, and unite around President Nixon. And Moon went to the White House and shook hands with Nixon. And I fasted for 3 days on the Capitol stairs because God wanted Nixon. And my father was like, "Hey, Steve, you were right. He's a crook." I'm like, "Dad, you don't understand. God wants Nixon to be president." He said, "No, you were right. He's a crook." I said, "No, Dad, you don't understand. God wants him." And my father said, "Now I know you're brainwashed. The guy's a crook." Dear old Dad.
Yeah.
Didn't help me leave. I just felt like he was taken over by satanic communist media, that I labeled and disregarded. And it's pretty amazing. I wanted to ask you another question. So what do you think people make of the fact that he's told 8,000 lies? Like even lies around things like it didn't rain during the inauguration when it rains. The weather report, the video, it's just like anti-science, anti-reality.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a head scratcher. I don't know what to make of that with the people like Jerry Falwell and Franklin Graham who just say he doesn't lie.
Yeah, Franklin Graham, I think it was in your blog. He said, he hasn't lied. Well, what about the 8,000 lies? Well, I don't know about those.
Yeah.
That's what Franklin Graham said. Like,
And confirmation bias. I mean, one of the things that happens when you have to maintain a fiction is that you just ignore the things and you go to your way to ignore the things that would disconfirm your belief. And I
Right.
think that's what they do. They just some of it they just don't know, and some of it they forget. They hear about it and then they find some way to discount it in the moment, and then they just forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
If they have to pay attention to it, they'll then fall back to the justification,
Right.
which is, well, this is better than Hillary.
Right.
Um,
Even though that was a choice 2 years ago and it's not relevant anymore.
yeah, it still becomes the justification for why I did what I did, and now we can't undo it. Why are you bringing that up?
Right, because it's uncomfortable, so don't bring it up. So, what's your sense of any other, evangelical ministers or scholars who have spoken out about Trump? It seems to be a few, but not a lot.
Well,
is there anybody you like or respect in terms of their analyses?
I mean, there are a few that aren't well known that have spoken out. Most of the faculty here are. I don't know that we have any real outspoken pro-Trump people on our faculty. But as far as like celebrity type pastors or anything like that, maybe John Piper. I don't particularly follow him or read him, but I don't think he's been favorable to Trump. I'd have to think about that some more. Maybe I could do a little looking around, but just the fact that nobody jumps to mind.
Yes, that's a very strong. Yeah, that's a very strong statement. I find your background fascinating because you studied social psychology and you understand things about the human mind that a lot of other religious folk don't, and you teach it. I'm wondering, as we wrap up, if there's anything else that you think is important to that you'd like to convey.
Let's see. I think you hit a lot of the good. You hit the high spots there. I wasn't expecting the Dominionism questions, but I think that's very relevant, especially that group that sees Trump's fate intertwined with theirs. There's like Paula White.
Seems to be the family, at least my understanding from Jeff Charlotte's work, that Mike Pence is associated with the family, and he was recruited into it by Chuck Colson, who was a Watergate plumber, and who was involved with the Moonies, actually doing anti-communist stuff. So the family is one Dominionist group. Reverend Drollinger, who does the prayer group meetings.
Yeah, I thought of him earlier. He's somebody I wanted to mention. The family is actually more complex than that. Hillary Clinton was actually associated with the family
15 years ago, I understand.
Yeah.
Not recently.
Well, no, even more recently than that.
Oh, okay.
In 2009, when Uganda wanted to pass a law making homosexuality a capital offense, she spoke at their prayer breakfast, as did Barack Obama, and they both condemned that bill. I was in the African suite when they did that, and you could hear a pin drop. It was quite a rebuke to the Ugandans. And that was very deliberate. The fellowship wanted to make sure that they got the message that they didn't approve of that.
Yeah, the Fellowship of Uganda came up with that idea.
Yes.
The president, that's
right.
The connection. And you're saying at the prayer breakfast, which the family started, I believe, in the 30s, you were saying when Barack Obama said that and Hillary Clinton, people didn't clap.
No. Well, not in the African suite, but the fellowship leaders in America deliberately had Hillary and, of course, Barack Obama had planned to speak anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Hillary was deliberately given a spot to speak and refer to the bill, so that there would be in no uncertain terms that the fellowship was not just a right-wing organization, but also, believed that gays should not be killed, and that the government shouldn't have those kinds of laws.
Mm-hmm.
I had interviewed Doug Coe, the leader of that group, earlier that day, where he said that very thing to me, and that was why I was there, was basically to be interviewed and to get that message out, because the American Fellowship was at odds with the Ugandan Fellowship over that.
At least that's what their public stance was.
Well, I think it's true. No, I mean, I saw some internal emails from the Ugandans where the Americans basically said this is not the right way to go.
Okay.
So I'm pretty
glad to hear that.
Yeah, I'm pretty convinced.
So you actually met Doug Coe. He passed away in 2017, I heard.
Yes.
So what was he like?
Well, he was
referred to in Charlotte's book as like the real Jesus figure on earth, who was doing this holy work. He didn't want to be in the limelight. He didn't want to be held up, his name, but he always was the power broker, and kind of things had to get cleared through him, is how it was, at least how I understood it in reading.
There's some truth to that. Doug was he was physically imposing, kind of a presence, tall fellow, large guy, had kind of that. Richard Cohen had this too, where he would look you in the eye and he would try to see into your soul.
Richard Cohen, the Mooney, who would do conversion therapy, but like to have affairs with guys on the side while he was doing conversion therapy, which I happen to know about.
Yes, that Richard Cohen. And
so because he's a Mooney, Warren, I got to tell you, I was trained to do the eyeball thing.
Yeah.
Look 3 inches into people's eyes, so they felt like I was staring into their soul. But anyway, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you.
Well,
has that same kind of look.
He had some of that, but he would, like with Cohen, it was, he didn't look away. With Coe, he would start there and kind of make sure he had your attention. And then it was, more appropriate. But I always thought, Coe just had this presence about him that you knew he was paying attention to you, and you felt like he really cared. Mm-hmm. He had that. But as far as the organization goes, he was the leader, although it wasn't organizationally set up that way. He was kind of the spiritual head, and he basically was just a freelance guy out doing his thing for Jesus. I mean, that's how he saw himself.
I have a much more hierarchical view from reading the books. I admit I could be biased, and to hammer everything's a nail. So I could have been listening and to the stories differently if I hadn't been in a cult and studying cults for 40 years. But it definitely felt like he was revered. Other people are not quite as spiritual as him, but he wasn't egotistical in the sense of, like Moon would stand in front of you and kick you or hit you with a bat.
Oh, no. Coe had none of that. I think, though, if people did things without Coe's approval, he wouldn't, dress them down. He wouldn't, he might, if it didn't work out, he might say something about it, but it wouldn't be emotionally browbeating people, things like that.
Right. But is it safe to say he was happy that Trump got elected?
I don't know. I don't. Now there are others around him that certainly were. Doug Burleigh, for instance,
Yeah.
his son-in-law, absolutely. I
And
think there are
Doug
a lot of
Burleigh, and I think I read it in your blogs, perhaps, that is the son-in-law of Doug Coe, who has extensive Russian
yes,
history and experience.
yes, yeah. One of the things that I think happened after Coe died is that a lot of the Trump partisans, a lot of the farther right fellowship members, um, really sought control of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably true now. Now, it's such a shadowy group that it's hard to tell, but it looks like from the reporting that the Young Turks, I don't know if you've seen the TY.
Yes, I have. They
Yeah,
think Ron Cameron of
yeah,
Jesus Fund, the wealthy man, is going to take over.
yeah,
But it's just speculation.
yeah. That I think they're pretty close on that.
Mm-hmm.
So it and because they've had people like Andrew Young and Bob Hunter and Hillary Clinton and other Tony Hall, other Democrats pretty involved over the years, it hasn't been known as a particularly partisan organization. But if it's going to swing that direction, I don't know that it'll survive as the kind of group it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope it doesn't. I mean, it'll go more like Ralph Drollinger's group that you brought up. And that guy is a piece of work. I mean, I think that fellow tries to say he's not dominionist when he certainly looks dominionist to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, apparently he didn't like being called a Christian nationalist by the New York Times, and I saw that he wrote a 1,400-page response or
Word, I think.
letter. Anyway, but it's the old walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, feathers like a duck. You can make your own decision. You can do a DNA test, but
Right.
He definitely, on the one hand, is saying, I don't want to influence politics. On the other hand, I want to influence the politicians who make the laws. And tell me how that works. If then what about the separation of church and state? But he apparently was quoted as saying that the fellowship was like lightweight or some negative.
Right.
Adjective.
Yeah, he thinks, and again, I think he's right. It's not what he is. He wants to be. He thinks they're kind of synergistic or not very Christian.
Mm-hmm.
They have Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists who are identified that way, but who also think Jesus is okay, who are part of the fellowship. And Drollinger, of course, thinks that's crazy because the only good politician, the only good voter is an evangelical Christian who thinks just like him.
Right. So interesting. So, and before I let you go, and we're almost out of time, libertarianism in terms of people who have been supporting Trump and such, do you have any comments about that? Like Paul Ryan claimed to be Christian, but he was an Ayn Randian.
I don't know a lot about that. I did write a little bit about the Pauls, Ron Paul and Rand Paul. When Ron Paul ran for president, there was some of his supporters in Iowa were Reconstructionists. This is another kind of dominionist.
Mm-hmm.
The attraction of the Reconstructionists to the libertarians is that libertarians want decentralization in government, and so do the Reconstructionists. They don't want a national government telling everybody what to do. They want little fiefdoms all over the place. So states would be okay, but preferably, municipalities, really. Little governments, little fiefdoms where local control would be the norm.
Mm-hmm.
And to the degree that Trump wants to deregulate, not nationalize as opposed to globalize, I think that's where the libertarians are attracted to him.
Interesting. And so you're referring to Reconstructionists who are Christian Reconstructionists.
Right, like Rushtuni, Greg Bonson. I don't know if you know any of these names.
No, I don't.
Okay. Yeah, you look up Rus, and I can send you some of this. Rusas Rushtuni. I'll have to send you this
Okay,
stuff.
please do.
He's an interesting character in that at one point he suggested that in a Christian government, all the adulterers and gays would be rounded up and stoned.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Nice.
And in Iowa primary, before that, Paul was kind of surging, and one of his ministerial endorsers that Paul actually featured on his website wrote a book calling for the execution of homosexuals.
Mm.
So I posted that on my blog, and that didn't go over so well with Paul. He had to backtrack and disclaim that. And
well, good for you to do that. I want to leave you by just saying, when I read Malcolm Nance's book, The Plot to Destroy Democracy, which was primarily about Putin, his PSYOPs war, he interviewed one of the former heads of, I guess, propaganda for the KGB or the FSB. He talked about how the Russians had a $4.5 billion budget for 2017, and how they had identified 5,000 personas, American personas, and how they were able to then figure out what buttons to push with each persona. And they would even send human beings, not just bots, but human beings, to join each of these groups to then pit them against other Americans who had another point of view, just to sow conflict and confusion, and to sow a lack of trust in institutions or leaders or even in science. So that makes people more confused, more feeling helpless, so that authoritarians can take control and people care less. Because they're so like, I can't, I don't know what's up, I don't know what's down, I don't know what's true, I don't know who to trust, whatever. And then, the loud, confident daddy voice, trust me, I know exactly what to do. Follow me and I'll help you.
Right. I alone can fix this.
I alone. No one loves women, respects women more than I do.
Right.
And etc.
No one's accomplished more than me in my first 2 years.
Right. Good ones. So thank you so much for taking the time to spend with me and share some of your knowledge. I really love your blog. I think you're touching on a lot of very important, timely issues of substance, and I have a feeling we're going to be in touch.
Good. Well, thanks for your work. I appreciate it as well.
Yeah.
Good to talk with you.
Yeah. Thank you again. Bye.
Bye.